Every July, a dense crowd moves slowly through the Manhattan grid, collectively shouldering a heavy religious statue along the streets of Inwood. For over a century, this diaspora community has maintained this exact festival, using the ritual to navigate the hardships of life in a new country. The practice centers on an exact replica of a patron saint statue, brought from their ancestral home in Filandari, Calabria. When a community is severed from its geography, they often attempt to anchor themselves psychologically by reconstructing physical practices in their new environment. This specific tradition originates not in an urban street, but in a system of ancient rock-hewn caves in Byzantine Calabria. We have to ask how a devotion anchored in subtractive stone translates so effectively into the additive, concrete environment of a modern American metropolis. Most architecture is additive, building up with brick and steel. Subtractive architecture does the opposite, carving living voids out of solid rock. These physical voids are notoriously difficult to understand using standard Euclidean tools, as they represent the absence of matter rather than the presence of walls. To study these spaces, we look to digital humanities, specifically structure from motion photogrammetry, to translate these voids into quantifiable data. This methodology yields highly irregular, organic floor plans that map these absences as a grid of distinct morphological shapes. By using digital tools to map this physical topology, researchers can begin to identify the spatial patterns that successfully anchored this community across generations. Beyond the data, the cave remains a foundational archetype. In ancient Greek thought, Plato used the cave as a symbol of the world itself, while the myth of Trophonius linked the underground to the depths of the human subconscious. In this context, the darkness of the cave represents an absolute origin point, the birthplace of divinities, and a space for spiritual initiation. Carl Jung applied this spatial logic to modern psychology, viewing the act of descending through floors of a house as an exploration of the unconscious. Jung described life as a plant sustained by its rhizoma, the invisible life hidden beneath the surface. Theoretically, the Calabrian rock-hewn cave is a ruin of a negative degree, a space defined entirely by what was removed. The enclosure of the cave offered a psychological safety net against external despair, illness, or war. These were highly specific spatial environments, engineered to cultivate psychological resilience through the deliberate use of enclosed, subtractive space. This engineering dates to the Christianization of Calabria during the Byzantine era. Builders carved 12 specific Rupestrian cult sites into the region's earthquake-prone hills. These sites exhibit extreme asymmetry. Note the contrast between the central cross-shaped plan and the erratic, organic void directly to its right. The bottom left panel shows the chaotic tunnel structure of eremitic caves like Sant Elia Los Pereota, where the rock dictated the architecture. Traditional surveying methodologies assume right angles and level floors. Measuring tape and Euclidean geometry fail to capture a three-dimensional organic space carved directly into shifting bedrock. Without precise documentation, these structures remain invisible to modern archaeology, leaving their cultural history unrecorded. Documenting a void requires a technical approach radically different from documenting a building. The solution lies in the disciplinary field of drawing, using digital tools to map archaeological sites. Researchers used structure from motion photogrammetry to solve the problem of surveying these Calabrian caves. This process compiles massive data sets of overlapping photographs to map millions of individual spatial coordinates. As shown in the bottom left, the technology begins with an indefinite organic void. Moving to the right, the mathematical processing identifies geometric convergences and structural interferences within that raw shape. The result is a precise 3D mesh that replicates the negative space of the cave. This data allows for a critical interpretation of the site's morphology. It bridges the gap between architectural drawing and medieval archaeology, providing a framework to categorize these cultic spaces. An undocumented hole in the ground becomes a quantifiable typological abacus. Ultimately, SFM photogrammetry successfully translates an invisible physical void into a permanent, readable record of human habitation and survival. These cult sites were historically connected across the landscape by ancient itineraries, like those depicted on the Tabula Pettingeriana. These itineraria picta were the original ways humans mapped their physical routes of devotion. Geographic persistence occurs when these physical routes are severed by migration, but the psychological need for them remains. The connection traces from the Calabrian bedrock to the urban grid of Inwood, New York. The survival of the Santa Marina procession suggests that communities subconsciously reconstruct their deepest spatial anchors when displaced. The digital cataloging of these caves provides documentation of more than just architectural ruins. It reveals the spatial infrastructure that supported a community's psychological resilience. The patron saint and the physical cave provided a literal safety net for villagers facing war and illness. When immigrants from Filandari arrived in 1920s New York, they brought a wooden replica statue as a link to their home. They also brought the ingrained psychological architecture of the Calabrian bedrock. This suggests that for some civilizations, the most enduring cultural anchor is the space that isn't there, the architecture of the void.